Spoleto Festival is back for a film festival after being off for a year due to COVID. Today, I talk with Mena Hanna with the Spoleto Festival USA for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Mena Mark Hanna, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I appreciate it greatly. I know that you are the new, director, general manager for the Spoleto Festival USA, having replaced, obviously, Nigel Redding back in October. What is it like to be you these days?
It's busy. it's busy. I mean, it's fun. It's exciting. Yes. It's entirely exhilarating. I mean, my wife and I came from Berlin and moved here in October with our 2-year-old in tow and our 4-year-old dog. Adjusting to life in Charleston, really enjoying it. And it's been busy. It's been fun.
And fun. What else have you been able to adjust to when it comes to Spoleto?
Well, we've managed to put together a full festival this year, which I think, in a way, there's a lot of transformation in the air. It's an exciting moment. We have my announcement and the beginning of my tenure. We have Spoleto coming out of the pandemic. Our first fully fledged season since 2019. 2020 was a dark season. 2021 was pared down. We have Omar, this spectacular opera composed by Rhiannon Giddens and Michael Abels about the life of Omar bin Said, from a West African enslaved Muslim man who was sold into bondage here in Charleston, which was expected to be premiered in 2020, and now we are actually finally doing it in 2021. We've got a number of world premieres coming in addition to Omar. We have Unholy Wars, we have US premieres. It's exciting. I mean, I think we have something like 10 world and US premieres. We have 120 performances. We have, people from all over the globe coming. We're expected to reach audiences of about 65,000. I mean, this is we're showing the world, and we're showing Charleston that we're alive, we're strong, and we're better than ever.
How much time, Mena, did you give yourself to make this right? This Spoleto Festival 2021 right?
I mean, how much time do you have? I think you could. So my appointment was announced in July, and from that point onward, I had already had discussions in place with the team here in Charleston, and was already doing work through July, through August. I had another festival in Berlin that I was finishing up at the end of September. And so I hit the ground running. I mean, I started the job basically in the summer, and then came on full time at the end of September, and then moved here on the 21st of October. So it has been there hasn't been a moment of breath except for around Thanksgiving and then again for Christmas, which I'm deeply thankful of. Those were beautiful holidays that we enjoyed here in Charleston.
Yes, indeed. And as you mentioned, the season will feature more than 120 opera, theater, dance, and music performances across 17 days in May and June, obviously. Which performances describe Spoleto Festival, and particularly Spoleto Festival 2021, the best?
2022. No worries. Oh man, I mean, I think I'd be remiss to it's got to be Omar. I think so. Here's a little bit into how I kind of think about these things and frame these things. Sure. I want to look at one piece, even a collection of pieces, but right now it's one piece, Omar, wherein we could kind of draw out some sort of thread, where we could start to kind of have some themes of that piece spill out into other genres and into other sort of works and into other forms of expression. I mean, Spoleto is an entirely unique venture in the United States. I can't really think of another multidisciplinary festival that is producing at this level of artistic excellence across the board through dance, theater, opera, jazz, orchestral performance, chamber music, our sort of front row series. I mean, it's extremely multidisciplinary, and its multidisciplinariness is its uniqueness.
50% of the audience members come from out of town. How many of those people do you expect to come this year for 2022?
I mean, I think ticket sales are tracking, very well right now through our pre-sale. My expectation is that we'll have a pretty well-attended festival full of, our outside audience, our 50% outside audience, our 50% local audience, and I think we'll probably track along those lines. Maybe there will be a slight uptick in outside audiences this year because of Omar and other world premieres that we're having. But I think, it'll probably be about 50-50. I'm not entirely sure. It's hard to tell what audience behavior will be like because we haven't had a fully fledged festival over the last 2 years. So predicting audience behavior on recent performances is a kind of a hard alchemy right now. But early returns are very robust ticket sales and a lot of optimism.
Now, I know that attendees travel from 49 states and 16 countries. How many regionally are traveling this year in your mind?
I think it'll be worldwide again. I hope so. And I think it'll be probably with a national pull. I mean, one way to track this is to look at the kind of media coverage we've had. We've had pretty exceptional national media coverage. We've had international coverage. And we've also had local coverage. So my expectation is that there's a lot of excitement for what we do. There's a lot of appetite for it. And I think, this festival has taken it upon itself to really be a place of imagination and excitement and creation, especially by platforming marginalized voices. I'm Arab. My parents are Egyptian. The story of Omar speaks personally to me. He wrote his autobiography in Arabic. It's a language that I read and write and speak. And for me to kind of take that text and understand that this displays that Africa is also the genesis of America, that Africa is also part of our origin story as this nation, that is something that we can no longer ignore. And I think people are rising to the call and attention of that and are excited about pieces that demonstrate that.
And what other pieces demonstrate that when you look at the festival?
Oh, I mean, we have Youssou N'Dour coming from Senegal, sort of the countryman of Omar bin Said. We have, there's so much. We have Reggie Wilson performing Power. We have Ndutso Makatini performing from South Africa. Of course, we have Unholy Wars, this new opera that's being developed by Karim Solomon and Kevin Newberry, which is about understanding the Crusades and the narrative of the Crusades from a Arab American perspective, a post 9/11 Arab American perspective. Karim, it comes from Lebanese extraction. His parents moved to the United States during the Lebanese Civil War. For an Egyptian, obviously, that's a very familiar story too. So I think the whole festival really is about, to a certain degree, migration. It's about being out of place and out of time, and using that sense of alienation as a way to create art that bridges people, that bridges those divides, that can create a transformational experience.
What do those other divides mean when it comes to arts these days?
What are those divides? I mean, I'm talking more about social and cultural divides. That the world and life of Omar bin Said, which was an enslaved African who lived, was born at the end of the 18th century and was sold into bondage here in Charleston in the 1820s, and lived most of his life, lived the rest of his life in bondage in North and South Carolina. To actually hear his words from the most marginalized person in American history, that of an enslaved Muslim African, is about understanding that our history is something that we can actually take from the people who have lived it, from the people who have experienced it. And it's not about some sort of received narrative or some sort of received tradition. And I think this art expresses that. It's time that we understand, what makes this country so unique and so special, and celebrate that. And I think his story, which is emotionally and psychologically terrifying, but also incredibly hopeful, and has a deep humanism to it, is something that people will understand and see replicated throughout the festival.
And what are those our replicas of Spoleto that you hope that people will see?
Well, I think you see work like this in Unholy Wars, which is also about being out of place and out of time, and sort of turning back and against received narratives and received traditions. I mean, you see it as well, even in La Boheme. I mean, we're doing La Boheme, and we're not doing La Boheme in the typical way. La Boheme normally starts with the first act when Mimi and Rodolfo fall in love, and ends in the fourth act when, and I hope I'm not giving it away, Mimi dies. And in this rendition that Yuval Sharon has sort of concocted, we have a La Boheme that starts with the fourth act and ends with the first act. It starts with a charity, with a tragedy, excuse me, and ends with that youthful romantic love, and that incredible vigor that you get from youthful love. And for me, that's also a metaphor of moving out of the pandemic, moving into hope, moving away from the darkness. So yeah, I think you see a lot of pushback on received narratives and received traditions, and I think it's cool that we can sort of take these pieces that are so wondrous and so much about human expression and so much about human experience, and make them our own and tell our own stories.
Yes, sir. And how do you tell your stories through those particular traditions?
So, I mean, I think what obviously Rhiannon and Giddens and Michael Abels did is that they told the story of Omar directly from his work.
Right.
And I think what Yusu Indoor is doing is that he's telling a very personal story, his own exploration of Sufi Islam and of faith, as one of the greatest pop stars in history. This is a guy who's had #1 hits with Peter Gabriel and won a Grammy for his 2004 album Egypt. So I mean, like, the storytelling is personal, but at the same time, these are universal themes that come up in these personal stories. That of what it means to be different, that of what faith means to one's own mind, that of what it means to be away from home, and how we bring our home with us to a new land, to a new country.
Now, what will the average viewer or participant see when it comes to Spoleto and arts with those universal differences?
I mean, it's it's hard. I'm talking about a lot of lofty language, but I think what happens, and this is what I think people need, is that after the pandemic, there's just been such a need for communal art. There's been such a need for that communal catharsis, for people to get together and express together, what humanity is. And you do that in a theater. You do that watching dance. You do that, outside of the cistern in a way that you can't really do over Zoom, and you can't really do over virtual art. When this is a strange kind of disconnector, the technology isn't quite there for our lives to be completely virtual. And I for one, I'm thankful of that, because I find so much solace in being in a dark theater with people that I don't know, and expressing at the same time that awe, that wonder. I was just at Alvin Ailey's presentation at the Gilliard last night.
Yes.
And the last piece, Revelations, I've seen it before. It's incredible. It's moving. The first two pieces that they did were spectacular. I mean, like, you have, I think it was the first time I've really seen like so much hip hop, trip hop, trap dancing, like in a stage like that with Alvin Ailey. And it really was about tearing down those barriers of cultural expression. And like, the place was rocking. People were so excited. We need to bring this back. It's good for our society. It's a public value. And it is, I think, a glue that keeps us together.
And Mena, what are those other barriers that you see when it comes to those cultural, differences and expressions?
I mean, like I think I'm Egyptian. My parents are Egyptian. I was born in London, but I grew up in the United States. I grew up in New Jersey.
Wow.
How do I look at the world in a way that is different from someone who's lived their entire life in South Carolina, someone who's lived their entire life in Nebraska? Um, and I think that when we look at a single work of art, and that single work of art provokes like such a wide range of emotion and expression from different people, but then there are like weird intersections. Like we all feel sad at the same time, we all feel happy at the same time. That's a kind of communal event that isn't replicable in any other thing. That's what art is. That's what public performance is, and that's where we bridge the differences. That's the transformational power right there. That's where audience members who can sit down and have a chance to see something may have a newness and a comprehension that they did not have before they took their seats. That's the power right there.
Wow. How have you been able to express yourself, do art during this whole COVID pandemic?
Well, I stay, despite the last several months. I'm normally someone who likes to stay in the background of things. I don't go on stage. I don't perform. I have. I was a boy soprano at one point, and sort of singing all over the world, and maybe that side of me is still around. But those diva days are over. I'm not someone who takes the stage and sort of creates and performs art in the same way that these magisterial artists do. That it's magic, and for me, it's really about putting those cool things together and sort of seeing the catalytic explosion of those different forms kind of build off of each other. The energy of a festival, and I've curated festivals in Berlin, is condensed in this period of time of highly concentrated activity. And it's a kind of shock to the system that you don't really get over a season of events at a symphony or a ballet or a playhouse or an opera house. And that's a different sort of type of excitement. I'm not saying those things aren't exciting and aren't unique. They are in their own right. But our excitement is different because it is so much about all of this energy happening at the same time, and so much about people being able to see different things right next to each other. That's what has always attracted me about running a festival, and I'm deeply humbled and privileged to be in the position to do so now.
And let me go back to the COVID, obviously, pandemic that we're still in right now. I know that obviously when the festival participants come, obviously they'll have to be vaccinated. What type of science are you all currently following?
I mean, this is really about our bottom line as a business. We have had artists tell us that they will not perform, for unvaccinated audiences. So the reason why we have such a strict vaccination policy is because of how fundamental it is to our bottom line as a business. Unfortunately, that is the tack we are taking right now, and I believe it is the right tack to take. I believe it's the right position for an organization that is invested in the health of its community, and we're here to make sure that our audience members and our artists and our staff members and employees and everybody who makes a special thing happen feel comfortable and feel secure about their own health. And having a strict vaccination policy is the way to do that.
Now, why is a vaccination requirement necessary for an outside social distance event, say at the Cistern?
Well, the Cistern isn't going to be a social distance event. It's outside, but people are right next to each other. And I'm not going to get into the science of it. But I mean, we have highly virulent strains of COVID now that have been passed outside, and it's for the comfort of our audience members and artists. It's as simple as that.
Now, obviously, when it comes to this vaccination requirement, when they submit their proof, is an ID required?
ID will be required. We're doing work around this to make this as painless and seamless as possible. And I think we're going to come up with pretty exciting ways for people to kind of like move through that line quite quickly. I should also say that the vaccination policy as it stands right now, or actually I should say COVID policy, because it's vaccinated right now, it's vaccination, fully vaccinated, plus booster, plus masks. Is as if we were putting on the festival tomorrow. You know, COVID is a highly fluid situation. The only way we can have a policy and have ticket sales and feel confident about that is if we were creating a festival in the anticipated state of the current reality, which is sort of that, you know, we are dealing with a highly virulent strain of Omicron, so on and so forth. Now, as that changes, as that moves, as that progresses, you know, we will revisit our policies.
Okay.
So there's a sense here that like this is not just unique to Spoleto. This is what most other cultural organizations are doing. We're going to kind of make sure that we look at the science and see what's happening with our community and adjust accordingly. But right now, you know, it is, you know, everyone will be fully vaccinated. Everyone will be fully masked, and that is to the comfort of our audience and artists.
Why not wait until April to make this announcement?
Cancel tickets. How do you sell tickets for an event like this without actually articulating a policy first? So the best thing is to have a policy and revisit it closer to the festival, because people will feel more secure and artists will feel more secure about coming if you have articulated this policy. I mean, the artists are booked, you know, months ahead of time.
Right.
Performances like in operas are prepared years ahead of time.
Right.
So, I mean, we've had a cast for Omar now in place for like 2 years. So we want to make sure that we have the highest comfort level as possible for our audience and artists.
Now, I used to be a volunteer for Spoleto, and I obviously worked in the press room and a volunteer for Piccolo Spoleto as well. Will the volunteers have to be vaccinated as well?
Right now, it is all staff, audience members, and artists.
Okay. Now, how many of your full-time staff members are actually vaccinated and boosted?
All of them.
Okay. Now, I know 500 employees, full-time and part-time, that are employed during the festival. How much of that has been cut in half because of COVID?
I mean, look, we haven't really quite done the full like seasonal staff right now, but there hasn't been much pushback. I mean, everybody wants to make this happen, and everybody seems to be happy to do what it takes. Yeah.
Now, how many volunteers do you hope will engage with this festival this year?
I think it'll track to similar numbers in festivals in the past.
Okay. Now, I know you told this in an interview with the New York Times, I believe. You said this: Charleston has seen tremendous growth and rapid change, with nearly 60,000 people relocating to our area in the last decade. How does Spoleto smartly prepare for this massive growth?
Ooh, that's a great question. I love that question, because I think that's about opportunity, Quintin. I think that's where we can look at what is happening now and what we can do in the future. And I can't give too much away, but there are a lot of discussions about that. We have to make sure that the festival does not only grow with the city, but is anticipatory of future growth. And yeah, we'll see that happen over the next several years.
And you also said this too: we want art to be more than something that expresses received traditions, as you mentioned, or something that is a reinforcement of a received canon. What do you hope Spoleto will be a reinforcement of in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, we want art to be more than a reinforcement of a received canon. So I think what we want is we want art to be more expansive. We want art to be more accessible. We want art to have a different type of audience complexion in the future that is much more demographically diverse than it has been in the past. And we will produce art to that end, and we will work on engaging with those audiences and to those stakeholders and to our community to that end, to make sure that Spoleto is fully enmeshed in the region, not just in Charleston, but in the region. and understand that Spoleto really has the potential and the opportunity to be a vital cultural cornerstone for a regional cultural ecosystem.
Where is that cornerstone right now?
I think Spoleto is part of that. Yeah, I mean, I think you have a festival that attracts artists from all over the world that has had the capacity to, do so many incredible things in the past, and has one of the great sort of young artist orchestras. It has right now, I think, the potential to have one of the great sort of young artist choruses or choirs as well. We have a place where, incredible artists, people like Anthony Roth Costanzo, have had some of their first performances here. We have a chamber music series that feels so taut and vital and part and layered into the community that people are extremely excited about. We have the finale, we have the cistern, we have jazz. We have all of these things that you can do in a festival format. Now, what we need to do is we need to figure out what that means for the future with all of the change that has happened. Now, that quote is about that 60,000 number is about the last decade. I mean, I don't have the data on this, but one could just sort of see anecdotally that there has been transformational change in Charleston over the last 2 years from COVID. All of these people moving here, the complexion of the city changing. And we have to understand what that means for the city, what that means as a cultural institution for the city, and what we can do to better public value in this city.
What do you see will be those transformational changes for art in generalities in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Omar is a great indication of that. You got with Omar, it's an opera written by Rhiannon Giddens, a woman of color, who is not an opera composer, although she studied opera voice back in her undergraduate days, I believe, at Oberlin. And you have an opera written by her and Michael Abels, a spectacular composer who's most known for his film scores, for the score Get Out, which is like so cool. But they're not typical opera composers. It's not a typical sort of like new music opera composer that is coming from a typical European aesthetic. And what they're doing is that they're taking a highly personal story to them and to their community, and they are taking it into the world of opera and sort of changing the complexion of what opera can be. And I think another piece that does this was recently demonstrated at the Metropolitan Opera in New York is Fire Shut Up in My Bones by Terence Blanchard. So it's not just us. I think what we are seeing is a movement toward a wider aesthetic framework that is much more inclusive, that is much more accessible, that tells modern stories or tells stories that are about our modern condition, and does so by elevating stories that don't normally happen in an opera house. And to me, that's super exciting. That's what art should be.
Now, what stories does Spoleto want to elevate that are normally not told in a playhouse?
I mean, like all of the work we're doing, like Omar, like Unholy Wars, like the work of like Power, like Unholy Wars, like I mean, all of these pieces, they are about telling stories that are somewhat atypical. They're breaking down received traditions. They're opening up the narrative a little bit. And Unholy Wars particularly is using a Baroque operatic aesthetic that's like 17th century and 18th century, that is written about the Middle East by European composers and turning that on its head. And I think these are really cool examples of where the festival can go in the future, and not only the festival, but where art will be in the future. So instead of work by typical composers, you would have the work of those composers, people like Mozart, Beethoven, and Puccini. You would have them sort of recontextualized in a way that kind of is exciting and inventive, like La Boheme, and put alongside modern work by those voices that have not typically been platformed in our opera houses, in our symphony halls, through our ballet corps, and in our playhouses.
Wow. I know this is probably redundant, but what does Spoleto mean to you?
That's not redundant. I mean, I think
You
I think
talked
that's
about it a
like
little bit.
I mean, yeah, but like to me personally, I mean, it's a
Okay.
deeply kind of like philosophical and existential question that I'm going to probably search over for the next several years. You know,
Yes.
I think Spoleto can mean community. You know, I think Spoleto can mean let us be a place where people can try things out, where artists, you know, both far and wide and local, can try to create work that is incredibly exciting and fulfilling and changes the way people see things. And that's what we are going to try to do.
And they're telling me here on Zoom that I'm running out of time. But Mena Mark Hanna, thank you for your time. And again, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups. Welcome to Charleston, and good luck to you in May.
Thank you very much, Quintin. It was such a pleasure to speak with you, and I look forward to seeing you at the festival in May.
Absolutely.